and welcome back to Off the Shelf Book Talk with Book Lovers. I'm Elizabeth Nelson here with Kay Johnson, and we're back. And it's been a little while.
Yeah, and you might wonder why. I was trying to figure out the last time we taped in maybe May,
I think so.
early
Yeah.
May or April.
Yeah.
So we're back, but in the interim, I fell down a flight of steps, 15 steps to be exact, and ended up spending a month in the hospital in Minneapolis and then 3 weeks in transitional care, and then pretty much the summer recovering, and then I returned to work at the Leader after Labor Day. And so we are now in position where we can return to Off the Shelf.
Yes.
So here we are, and we're very happy to return.
Yes.
So what have you been reading,
What
Elizabeth?
have I been reading? Well, I finished Ruth Ware's newest book,
Oh, okay.
which is called 0 Days. And so this, I don't know if people are familiar, well, we are because we've watched it a lot, but there's a movie from the 80s, I think it was the 80s or maybe it was the 90s, called Sneakers.
90s,
And
I think.
it's about, so in Sneakers, it's about this company that breaks into places that you're not supposed to be able to break into to see if you can break into those places,
That's right.
which is actually a line from the movie. So anyway, this book follows Jack and Gabe, who are husband and wife, and their job is the title of what they do is called the penetration specialist. So they're the same kind of people as Robert Redford and his gang, where they're trying to break in both physically and electronically into these businesses, and then they report back to the businesses on what happened. Well, of course, when the book opens up, everything goes terribly wrong, as it always does, and Jack comes home and Gabe has been murdered. And they believe that she's the one that did it. So because in books we don't just let the police do it and just wait and see what happened. If we're being framed, we run out of a full police station because we can break out of anywhere.
Yes, that's true.
And then try to figure out what happened. And so in true Ruth Ware fashion, it moves. The pace is great. You get a couple of those twists and turns in there with things you didn't see coming. And I mean, she's really got her knack down in her genre, because I think there's only been one book of hers that I've read that hasn't flown really well, and flowed really well, and that was one of her early books. But this one I really liked. It's so it's a tech-related, since it's with 0 Days comes from 0 days is like the day that everything has to be fixed with anything electronic before it goes live. So before that, you have all this time to fix any holes, anything that's gone wrong with your system before it goes live. So the first part of the book counts down to this 0 day, and then it goes forward in time. But I really enjoyed it. Quick read.
Would you recommend it?
I would recommend it. I recommend Ruth Ware. Anytime people are like, I'm looking for a good mystery thriller, I'm like, she's an easy read. Nothing real complicated. You don't.
Straightforward.
Yes. Not a whole lot of red herrings. No surprise people turning up on the 12th. The very last page to actually be the murderer,
Yes.
like some people have done. But yeah, what have you been reading?
Right now, I am reading The Times by Adam, Nagorny. Mm-hmm. And it's the history of the New York Times newspaper from about 1976 to 2000. And what's interesting is, well, first of all, I'm in the newspaper business, so it's an interesting, because the New York Times is considered the epitome of newspapers in the world. It's just the top of the heap. And as you would expect, there's big egos and clashing egos and clashing reporters, and this was during the high points of newspapering, when they had foreign bureaus all over the world with like 50 and 60 and 70 reporters. And the Sulzberger family owns the paper to this day, and they fulfill the role of publishers, and then there's all these people, and it's very hierarchical with, the executive editor and down through, and then they have all these they consider themselves to be so above everything that, you know, they will argue about the use of one word in a headline because that's just what they do. And so it's interesting because in the book they talk about the Pentagon Papers. If you saw the movie The Post, it talks about how they got them and published them, and ultimately it went to court and it ended up being a very big First Amendment case. And the Washington Post was involved in that. And then they talk about 9/11. They talk about the Iran-Contra with Oliver North, all those kinds of big cases. And then they argue about interesting things too, like they wouldn't use the title Ms. for years because they didn't feel it was appropriate. But what was interesting is they felt they could use Miss and Mrs. when they talked about women in stories, but they never indicated if a man was married or single. And so that was a real bugaboo for a long time. And when they finally issued a memo saying they accepted Ms., then Gloria Steinem and her minions from Ms. Magazine showed up and said, finally. and another one was homosexuality. They would not use the word gay for a long time. And then they also would not talk about AIDS and HIV for a long time because they sort of had this thing about gay lifestyle and the implications. And so far, but I'm only at 18%.
Yeah.
So I still have a lot of book left to go. And so it's interesting, and I get it. Some of it, you know, because there's deadlines and there's, you know, your editors are in New York, but your reporters might be in Vietnam. So how do you corral these sort of free spirits and so on? So the book is really good, and Doug Hanneman, my former editor who's retired from the Leader, had actually gotten it from the library.
Oh, yeah?
And then he didn't have time to read it, so he gave it to me. And I started reading it, but I didn't get far enough into it, and I had to return it. So I actually put money down, $14.99, and bought it on Amazon. So I'm now the proud owner of the Times.
Well, good.
So if you're wondering about newspapers, and in particular the New York Times, I recommend it, even though, like I said, I'm only 18% of the book read. It's still really good, and it's really interesting. And one thing I'll add that's even more interesting is the New York Times was scooped by the Washington Post on Watergate. And throughout the history of the New York Times, they are forever bringing up the fact that they were scooped on Watergate. And so it's an interesting thing. These people have long memories.
I'm sure.
So
well, I think, some of them in New York, one of them was founded by Hamilton, one of the papers, Alexander Hamilton. Is that the Post?
Could be. I don't know. I'd have to look.
I'll have to look it up too. But yeah, I mean, some of these go
way back.
Alexander Hamilton started the newspaper because he wanted to just badmouth everybody in politics. I mean, they just basically, those guys just said whatever they wanted to and did not retract any statements. So that's how they did it. They would start their own paper so that they could say whatever they wanted, and no one could call them on it.
There's a lot to be said for that, because they didn't have all the libel laws back then and all that good stuff.
They didn't have any of that. But
so if you're interested in reading the Times, you can borrow it from the Hutchinson Public Library. If you're interested in owning it, you can buy a book or download it online anywhere. So what else have you read?
I finished the new Riley Sager book, which was the only one left.
Oh, okay. How many?
So,
how many in the series?
This is the only one, and this is a standalone book.
Oh, a standalone. Yep. How rare.
But I know. All of his have been standalone, and he falls into the same kind of category with Ruth Ware and all these other people with the thrillers. And usually his have some kind of a, few of them have like a supernatural kind of element to it. So this one, in the book, this follows Kit McDeer. She is a home health aide, and she was very recently put on leave for something that happened, of course, with one of her previous patients. And so when she comes back, her boss pretty much tells her he has this one job open she can do. It's a live-in position for Leonora Hope. Well, now Leonora Hope is basically this world's Lizzie Borden. You know, she had, in the telling of the story, she murdered her whole family one night and then had a stroke or something and became homebound and is living up in this house. And so Kit is going to go take care of this murderess. And when she gets up there, discovers that all of the stuff from the previous home health aide is still in her room because this woman just miraculously disappeared. And so you have, and then she discovers that Leonora can type on the typewriter and talk to her about things. But with that going on, she starts to realize there might be something else going on because the pages are moved in the typewriter in the morning, or she hears people walking around the room. And so it's trying, and then so through that, you're going kind of back and forth through the typing. Leonora is telling her everything that happened leading up to this night of the murder because she wants to tell her story. And so it's figuring out what happened. But if anybody, if Kit mentions anything about her typing, then Leonora just acts like she can't type and she can't do anything and she can't move and all of this. So it's figuring out.
Doing the typing?
It's figuring out what's she hiding, what's really going on, and Riley does a great job too with surprise twists and turns and things you didn't quite think of. And even at the very end of the book, when you thought you had reached whatever twist, there could be no more twist, there is still one more twist that he leaves you with at the end that you, again, it was like, well, I did not see that coming. So, but again, this quick read, very enjoyable. I think I read it. I think I just sat down and stayed up really late and finished it. And then, of course, I paid for it the next morning, staying up late like you always do when you have to finish a book. But it was worth it. Again, he's another one that he's very consistent with his writing. And I've only had, I think, one of his books that I didn't like either. So, and he's just kind of popped on the scene within the last few years. Okay. I think. But I haven't read anything. But he's been pretty much the one, I think one a year, if not more than that. I could go back and check it out, but very good book, very much, those are always, it's a big house up on a hill and spooky and it's crumbling and it's decaying because nobody's coming up anymore. And so it's all of that kind of stuff that sets it's very kind of similar to like a Gothic type setting, but very interesting. What else have you been reading, Miss Kay?
Let's see. There's another nonfiction. There's a lot of nonfiction books coming out now, politics. The one is called Collision of Power, Trump, Bezos, and the Washington Post. And it's by a guy named Martin Barron. Okay. And Marty Barron was the executive editor at the Boston paper. Okay. And he's the one who led the team that broke the Catholic priest pedophile. And he broke that story, or his team broke that story, and we know it went around the world. Yes. And so, but he went from Boston Globe to the Washington Post. And so this book is all about, because Bezos, who owns Amazon, or who founded Amazon, owns the Washington Post. And so it's about their interplay, and Trump became president, and all of that sort of thing. And so I actually started reading it and then quit to read the Times because I had to get that back to the library. So now when I'm done with the Times, although I'm only at 18%, so it might be a while. It might be a while. I intend to read Collision of Power by Martin Barron. Okay.
Hopefully you can keep your newspapers.
Yeah, right. Yeah, there's the Washington Post and the New York Times, and they've been competitive for years and years. And Abe Rosenthal was the executive editor, I think, of the Times, and Ben Bradley was at the Post, and they were competitive and stuff. And so interesting stories. You know, they broke big stories, and so it's interesting. So what else is on your list?
I finished Kate Morton. She had a new book that came out back in April called The Homecoming. And this takes place in Australia. And and this is another one of those that Kate Morton very much, her books go back and forth in time. So you have when in 1959, when the original event happened, and then you have present time with the people trying to figure out what happened. So the main character in the story, her name is Jess, and she is a journalist. She's a freelance, I think she's a freelance journalist, is what it is. And she she's recently broken up with her boyfriend, and so she gets a call that her grandmother had a stroke and is in the hospital. And so she flies home from London to Australia, and when she goes to see her grandmother is saying, he's trying to take my baby, all this stuff, and she's kind of trying to figure out what's going on, and her grandmother keeps referring to a house that she doesn't know anything about. And so it turns out that back in 1959, her grandmother was visiting her brother, and while he was gone on a trip, she came down when she was pregnant to spend Christmas with her sister-in-law and all of the sister-in-law's kids. And when the sister-in-law and all of the kids went out for lunch on Christmas Eve and did not come back. They all were found dead at a picnic site, and nobody knew what happened. And for years, it's been said that it's just been blamed on the mom, that she went kooky and killed
the gang,
everybody, and then the new baby that I think was just a couple of weeks old was just missing. Nobody knew what happened to the baby, and so it's figuring out kind of what happened and what really the story was, because so you have a bunch of different factors kind of playing in with this book. You have just trying to figure out what happened, and then there's kind of some of course you always have the family dynamic when it's anything that takes place over quite a bit of time, which those usually there's a lot of family secrets in anything Kate Morton writes.
Okay.
And this one, and I always say that her books generally, because they're all standalones, they generally wrap everything up very nicely in a little bow. And her last couple of books, like the last one I think was The Clockmaker's Daughter, I think was her last one. And that one, the bow wrapping up was just a little too nice.
Oh.
Like, it made a couple too many leaps, The Clockmaker's Daughter did, about how things were connected. But this one, I had to kind of sit and double check and think how everything linked up and connected to make sure it made sense in my brain. But I really liked it. Kate Morton's just got a very nice writing style, and as long as you can keep back and forth where you're going and who's talking to who, it's generally pretty easy.
As long as you can keep track.
Yeah, they're not usually too. Sometimes the books that jump around from time period to time period, sometimes they can be kind of hard to remember where you
that's
are
exactly right.
and who the bad
Then
guy
you have to
is.
page back and
You do. You have to page back and guess.
see what's going on.
The time change is a killer.
Yeah, well, it's kind of late in the day, and I sort of fade.
Yes,
My energy is not as solid as I thought it was, actually.
It's okay. I go to bed after my kids go to bed.
Yeah, I'm pretty much early to bed, early to rise.
Yes, I hear you. Well, what else have you read, Miss Kay?
Well, I read a book called The Asheville Christmas Cabin. And it's the first of the 3 books. And it's a family. It was an aunt, and then her sister, and her sister's husband, and their 3 girls.
Okay.
And they always came to this cabin for Christmas and different summers, and had been in the family a long time. And anyway, the parents went out on a date right before Christmas and were killed in a car accident. And so it was the aunt and the 3 girls. So she sort of packed them up and took them and left, and they haven't been back for many years. Well, the three sisters, one's in New York, one's in California, and the other one is in North Carolina, where the story takes place. And their aunt says, Elizabeth says, hey, I want you to come for a month, and I want you to come for Christmas. Bring your family, and, she said, I have something to tell you.
Okay.
So, of course, they all assume she's dying. But she's not. It's actually more interesting. But they all come, and there's issues in all their life. One is has a marriage that's going south. Another one is a workaholic, and those types of things. And so they come to the cabin, and Elizabeth, who was a art dealer and a jet setter and always wore fancy clothes and perfect hair, greets them in overalls and boots, and her hair is now gray.
Okay.
And they just have no idea what's going on with Elizabeth. And so the first book is about, all of this uncertainty and what's going on, and kind of getting their feet back under them in the cabin and coming to terms with their parents dying and kind of this whole thing. And so the book ends sort of right. I finished the book on Sunday, and thank God the next one comes out Friday, so I can keep up, because it was like,
You're like, I want to know what happened.
Well, and a lot of times, books in a series won't leave you so cliffhanging, but this was a genuine cliffhanger.
I feel that the cliffhanger is becoming more popular again with authors.
Oh, that could
Because
be.
I have had 2 or 3 other series that have ended on a cliffhanger.
Well, this one is a real cliffhanger, and I just
know,
thought,
yeah.
well, my goodness. So I was so happy to see the second one comes out Friday, the third one comes out early in December, so I can wrap this crew up by then. But it's good, and it's hang on one sec. I can tell you who the author is. Hope Holloway and Celia Scott. And it's called The Asheville Christmas Cabin. Okay. And it's good. I've enjoyed it. It's a nice Christmas read, and so on and so forth. So I definitely would recommend that. And then another series I started reading, and I literally read these one after the other. The titles all have moon glow in the headline, their title, and they're by Deborah Garner. And the Moon Glow is a restaurant in a hotel. It's a small town, and it goes wild for Christmas. And the hotel has a lot of the same guests come year after year for Christmas. So there's the returning guests, and they always a few new ones. And then there's fancy Christmas Eve dinner they make, and then there's sort of all these relationships and all this, so on and so forth. But the food is really good in the book, because I'm forever going, oh my God, they're having prime rib or pork roast and muffins and some kind of eggs and this and that. And there's like 9, I think, in the series. Okay. Next one comes out in December, I think. But they're fun because, and you do need to read these in order, because the relationships change among the characters as you advance through the books. And so they're good. And again, Deborah Garner. Okay. And like this one, Evergreen Wishes at Moon Glow. Okay. And that's like number 9. It'll be out November 24th. Okay. And stuff. So, yeah, they're fun.
Well, good. And on that note, that's all we have time for this episode of Off the Shelf. If you've got anything you want us to read, or if you've read anything we talked about, you can reach out to us on Facebook or our email at offtheshelfbooktalk@gmail.com. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.